I'm happy to introduce Medea Benjamin, and she has a very distinguished list. She actually asked me to shorten it, and I hate to do this because it's an outstanding record. It's my great pleasure to introduce her. She's the co-founder of the women's peace group Code Pink and the human rights organization Global Exchange, has written 8 books. The latest is Drone Warfare, the Killing by Remote Control, has campaigned against the use of drones. She was in, the significant part of this that I can't leave out is she was in Egypt during the time of the revolution and has traveled to Egypt many times on her way to Gaza, where she's also doing work. Her latest attempt to go to Gaza was in March, when she had arranged had organized a 100-woman global delegation to meet with Palestinian women for International Women's Day. The Egyptian authorities, however, stopped her at the airport, put her in jail, then violently attacked and deported her. Upon return, she's been very outspoken against the Egyptian military government and U.S. government funds going to Egypt. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Benjamin. Oh, I got it appropriately delivered. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me here, and I feel strange telling my story when we hear these horrendous stories. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing the story about your husband's horrible imprisonment, and Lamia, who by video told us about the horrendous death of her brother. In my case, as Richard said, my involvement around Egypt really came through my involvement around the Israeli-Palestinian struggle. And I wonder if those of you here, how many of you are either Egyptian-American or Egyptians? Could you raise your hands? So the more I learn about what's going on in Egypt, the more I really feel that this is an issue for everybody in this country, because the U.S. has been so involved for decades in propping up the Mubarak dictatorship that really led to the situation today. And if we hadn't been giving over $1 billion every year to the military government in Egypt, the Egyptian people would have figured out by now their own democratic society. And so, yes, we are responsible. I had been going to Egypt because the Israelis would not let us into Gaza, and I had wanted, particularly after 2006, that terrible Israeli invasion, Operation Cast Lead, when over 1,400 people were killed in Gaza, wanted to go in, see for myself, bring humanitarian aid. And we organized 7 trips since 2006, always going through Egypt. And in the process, I became friendly with a number of Egyptians. Some of them were part of the April 6th movement. Some of them were Egyptians who were risking their lives going out on the street under the Mubarak dictatorship to protest. And they joined us in solidarity with the Palestinians. I happened to be going to Gaza just when the Egyptian revolution broke out, and instead of going on to Gaza, I had the opportunity to spend 2 weeks in Tahrir Square. I must say, some of the most exhilarating weeks of my life. I, as a young girl, had been to Woodstock. This was like Woodstock without the sex and the drugs, and the music was different, but it was wild and wonderful. And so many of my Egyptian friends would say to me, I was always so ashamed to be Egyptian. We withstood decades of this dictatorship and we didn't rise up. And suddenly in Tahrir Square, to see the Egyptian people rising up and loving one another, no matter if they were secular or religious or Coptic or whatever, they said, it makes me feel proud for the first time to be Egyptian. And I cried every single day I was out there. It was just absolutely beautiful, the outpouring of humanity. The people of Gaza, meanwhile, were suffering just like the Egyptians suffered after the upheaval. When Morsi came in, he opened the gates to Gaza and made it easier for people to go in and out. When Morsi was overthrown, all of that changed. The tunnels that had been the lifeblood for people inside Gaza were closed down. The border itself, where about 1,500 people a day had crossed, was pretty much closed down, and people could not get in and out of there. So we had this call from inside Gaza from the women saying, please, we are desperate, do something, come here. And that's why we organized this 100-person delegation. I was going early to set it up. People were coming from 8 different countries. We had Nobel Peace Prize winners. We had doctors, lawyers, professional women. When I got there, having worked with the Egyptian government to set this up, I had no idea that I would be stopped, but I was stopped at the border. When I got into the Cairo airport, gave in my passport, I was taken aside, never told why, held for 17 hours, not allowed to see anybody from the U.S. Embassy, not that they really tried to see me, but then I was told that I was being deported. When I said, can I please wait and see somebody from the embassy, I was thrown on the ground, their knees into my back. I was pulled so violently that I heard a pop of my arm coming out of a shoulder. I started screaming, and despite that, they put 2 sets of handcuffs on me. And when I was screaming in pain, you could see the bones sticking out of my arm there. They took off my scarf and stuffed it into my mouth. And that's how they dragged me down the hallways of the airport to put me on a Turkish airline plane. The airline said, we cannot take her like this, sorry, you must call an ambulance. The ambulance came. The Egyptian wonderful doctor said, she is not fit to get on an airplane, she must go to a hospital and have her arm reset. The Egyptian security would not let me go to a hospital and forced me not only to get on a plane, but to sit next to the 2 guys that did that to me on the plane. Luckily, there was the stewardess asked, was there a doctor on the plane? There was not only a doctor, but there was an Egyptian orthopedic surgeon who was my savior and made a little bed in the hall, in the aisle, and reset my arm on the plane. And when I got to Turkey, I was allowed to go to the hospital. But I tell this story because if you see what the Egyptian security was willing to do to me, I'm 61 years old, I'm an American who has devoted her life to peace, and that they had absolutely no compunction with me, it does give you a little bit of an inkling how they treat Egyptians, and we've heard some of this today. It also meant to me that I wake up, I'm in pain every single day. It will take months and months to heal, and I wake up about 3 or 4 in the morning, and every time I wake up, I think, poor Egyptian people, what can we do to be of help? And so that's the silver lining in my story. And Joe talked about being a human rights activist. I want to say that I'm not, excuse me with great respect, a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. I am a feminist, Jewish, secular person who really believes in the separation of politics and religion. I don't like a Jewish state, and I don't like Islamic states. But I do love liberty, freedom, human rights, respect for law, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and there is none of that in Egypt today. And so it doesn't matter what our beliefs are, as long as we come together as a human family and say, when people are in need, they need our support. And one of the things that really makes me upset is how little the American people know about what's going on. I'd love to see somebody do a poll to say, what happened in Rabat Square? And people, I'm sure, over 90% of them, and I hate to say this, would say, what? What is that? If you ask American people, how many people were killed after the overthrow of the Morsi government, they wouldn't know. How many people in jail, they would have absolutely no idea. So our number one thing, and why I wanted to come here and be part of this, is how do we educate people in this country? How do we get this information out? And I'm so glad we're live streaming, and this will be available for people to listen to. But we've got to find more ways collectively to get this information out. The other thing we have to understand is that our government's been very confused about this and wants to make nice with the military regime, wants to see the elections happen, and we know Sisi will be elected. That's a foregone conclusion. Because they want to get on with the business of giving this, quote, military aid, which really is money given to U.S. military companies, and they're dependent on this. It's part of the military-industrial complex. It's part of the U.S. One-sided policy towards Israel. And so they want to move ahead, and they are looking for excuses to be able to resume the aid that has been cut off to Egypt, resume more normalized relations with the Egyptian government. And we have to stop that, and one of the only ways we can stop that is educating the American people. What we have to educate them is not only what's going on now, but what are the plans, because there are future new counterterrorism legislation that's set to be approved that will further repress free expression, that will expand the definition of terrorism to include damaging national unity, natural resources, monuments, communication systems, financial or banking systems, the national economy, or hindering the work of regional and international judicial bodies and diplomatic missions. Imagine, under that definition, who can be called a terrorist. And these new counterterrorism laws will also expand who can be tried and convicted of capital punishment. And that will include people who are involved in managing or administrating terrorist groups, and now the Muslim Brotherhood is considered a terrorist organization. So we have to make sure that there is no opening up of U.S. Money to the military regime without basic things like releasing the political prisoners, investigating and holding accountable those who are responsible for the brutal attacks and killings of so many people since the Morsi government was overthrown, and the lifting restrictions on public assembly, declassifying Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, and allowing them to work in all aspects of life, including in the electoral process. And so in closing, I want to say that we, in the Egyptian-American and non-Egyptian-American community, have to find ways that we work together to do this kind of education, to protest all over the world at Egyptian embassies or anywhere that people who are representing this Egyptian government come, like we did last week at the Chamber of Commerce when the finance minister of Egypt came, and my partner Ty Berry jumped on the stage to say no U.S. money to support the Egyptian military coup until he was dragged off of that stage. That video is going viral. Let's do more of that. Let's shame the Egyptian government, and let's make sure that the U.S. government does not normalize relations with this Egyptian coup. Thank you.